Well, it's time now for Media Watch here on France 24, and Emma James joins me now. Good evening to you, Emma. Let's start with that news from Baltimore that 6 police officers are going to face charges in association with the death of Freddie Gray.
Yes, criminal charges for all 6 officers involved in his arrest, which happened, of course, last month. The Baltimore Sun has a particularly nice range of photographs showing the reactions on the street to this announcement. And you might think that their reactions are justified. I mean, everyone looking very jubilant and tears there on this gentleman's face, because in the wake of all these other high-profile cases where black young men have been killed by white officers, and there's been very little in the way of legal recourse, if you like. So in this case, clearly people in Baltimore were very pleased indeed to see that the charges have arrived. They include involuntary manslaughter and second-degree murder, so we're talking very serious charges here indeed. Now, the announcement came earlier from Baltimore's chief prosecutor earlier today, Marilyn Mosby. Politico has tweeted a quotation from her. "I heard your call for no justice, no peace," she says. Now, no justice, no peace could be taken to seem quite a negative term, because obviously we've seen scenes of violence and rioting and looting on the streets of Baltimore. But she has used it to say, I understand where you're coming from. If we go on to look around the internet, most of the reactions to this announcement are really talking about Marilyn Mosby. She's become a real talking point on this story. Ricky Smiley says, "Shout out to everyone in Baltimore who elected this awesome prosecutor. Now you see the result of your vote." Elsewhere, we've got Daniel Jose Older. "One woman just did more to calm the streets of Baltimore than an entire hyper-militarised police force ever could." Hashtag Freddie Gray, of course. In Baltimore, Marilyn Mosby's potent turn of phrase, "Your peace is sincerely needed as I work to deliver justice for this young man." And the hashtag Marilyn Mosby for President is also appearing. Now, the Daily Beast has written an article entitled "The Prosecutor Who Could Save Baltimore." And in it, they talk more about the history of Marilyn Mosby. She's only 35, the youngest chief state prosecutor in the United States. She's of mixed race. She's from a family of police officers. So as they point out, she's neither anti-black nor anti-police. She's been in office for just 5 months. So this is a real test of her abilities and her mettle. And she seems to have come out with a very, very strong reaction to this. She has pledged swift and transparent action to give answers to the grieving family. Now, elsewhere on the internet, there are interesting stories about what's been going on in Baltimore. The Washington Post, in particular, has been talking about how the Western media would cover this story if it had happened somewhere else in the world. And it is an interesting one to make those of us in Western media maybe take a look at how we are referring to things and how we're dealing with things. They've written this article as though it's not the United States, as though it's any other country. And they talk about international leaders expressing concern over the rising tide of racism and state violence. They talk about corruption in state security forces when handling cases of police brutality. And they refer to black Americans as a minority ethnic group because, of course, we have so many stories in the news at the moment where we're talking about minority ethnic groups being targeted. And it's not often the way that we refer to it when we're talking about black minority groups in the United States. So an interesting article there, really raising some flags and some concerns about how we view this story in context with others.
That sounds very interesting. I'll have to look out for that article. Another story you've picked out for us, the UK elections, of course, very nearly upon us. Lots of excitement. Last night there was a bit of a public television grilling for some of the leaders. What's being said about how they fared?
Well, it was an interesting one, this one, because in this particular question time, the leaders were facing questions purely from members of the public. Now, you might think they'd get an easier ride with this being the case, but not at all. They faced real grillings, all 3 of them. It was just David Cameron, Nick Clegg and Ed Miliband who were on the chopping block, if you like, last night. The 3 main parties, as seen traditionally, although the Liberal Democrats, of course, their popularity has tumbled away in recent years. But to take a listen now to how David Cameron was really put on the spot when it came to the National Health Service.
Surely anybody with half a brain can see that the NHS isn't sustainable in its present form, just pouring more and more money into it. You can't keep
Well,
putting
it's
more
very
and more
dangerous
money
in
into
elections
it.
to disagree with people, but I don't agree with you, sir. I actually think...
Well, you're wrong.
Well, okay.
I should be there. I should be there.
So as you see, the reactions there possibly a little harsher than you would get from a hardened journalist, if you like. The New Statesman takes a look at what we learned from this television debate and looks at how all of the leaders coped. But on David Cameron, they say, I should point out, of course, the New Statesman has publicly come out in support of the Labour Party. But the Tory leader, David Cameron, it said, fared very badly on cuts to welfare, how to handle the NHS, and ended on a very bad note in relation to how would you handle a coalition government if you don't win an outright majority. And one of the audience members actually said, winning by a mile is a good hope, but what if you don't? A very good point. And also taking a look at what happened today out on the campaign trail. David Cameron may have performed well last night on the television, but he's made a major slip up today out on the campaign trail. He described this election as career-defining, then said, country-defining. He later said that he meant it as both, that it was going to define his career and the country. What he'd meant to say was country-defining, and that's being seen as rather a hint of his egotism, if you like, which perhaps a little harsh, but certainly the slip was made and it's been picked up on a great deal today. Ed Miliband, if we take a look at the Independence article, they said his best line of the night was, I want to be the first Prime Minister who under-promises and over-delivers. But they said he was really fighting to get out of the shadow of New Labour and faced a very harsh question indeed on the record of Labour when in government and had they overspent last time they were in power. Take a listen.
Do you accept that when Labour was last in power, it overspent?
No, I don't, and I know you may not agree with that. But let me just say very clearly.
Even with all the borrowing, year on year.
No, I don't. Let me tell you.
How can you stand there and say you didn't overspend and end up bankrupting this country? That is absolutely ludicrous. You're frankly just lying. Sorry.
I guess I'm not going to convince you, but...
Now, that wasn't the only awkward moment for the Labour leader. If we take a look at this Vine on the internet, a little bit of an awkward stumble as he left the stage. He's not well renowned for being the coolest of customers, and it was a great shame that this really has probably got more attention for him than any of the comments that he made during last night's debate.
All right, thank you very much indeed for that, Emma James, as the UK elections are hotting up there. Just less than a week to go now. Thank you.